All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the West Essex Milwaukee School Board to order. Mr. Sickett, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Be happy to. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Burns,
Present.
Mr. Becker,
Present.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
Ms. Deal. Here. Mrs. Carr,
Here.
Mr. Sickich,
Present.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Are there any modifications to the agenda this evening?
We have no changes.
Okay. With that will move right into the superintendent's report.
Great. Good evening, everyone. And happy summer. So we'll start with 6.1, the legislative updates. So the Office of School Safety has launched Critical Incident Response Team Program. So that's Wisconsin Department of Justice, or DOJ, announced on June 16th that the state's Office of School Safety has begun training 12 regional critical incident response teams around the state. According to the DOJ, these CIRTs are designed to provide all Wisconsin K-12 public, private, charter, and tribal schools with access to a regionally based team to support them if a critical incident ever occurs at a school. At the federal level, the U.S. Senate moves closer to passage of bipartisan school and gun safety package. So a bipartisan package of measures aimed at improving school safety has cleared its first hurdle towards passage in the U.S. Senate. The 64-34 vote came just hours after Republicans and Democrats released the text of the legislation. The 80-page bill, called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, would provide millions of dollars for expanding mental health resources in communities and schools, in addition to funds devoted to boosting school safety. So we'll be monitoring both of those to see what resources we may be able to access to improve school safety. Then in 6.2, the Board of Education recognitions, given that it's summertime, there's few. But what I wanted to do is recognize the great leadership team meeting we had on June 16th. So it was our last official leadership team meeting. So that includes all of our principals, all of our DLCs, so deeper learning coaches, all of the district level leadership people are part of that day to kind of close out a school year. And I want to thank the leadership and learning team, so that's Deidre and her team, for putting the day together. It was also really interesting to have all of our school leaders, principals, and their teams do essentially what we ask our students to do, which is a presentation of learning. And so they did their presentation of learning based on their school improvement plan. And so shared data around where they landed compared to the goals they set and the process they used and any changes they made. And then there were a whole bunch of rounds of then the rest of us kind of taking turns serving as critical friends and asking questions, giving feedback. And I'm doing my end of year meetings right now as part of the principal and leader evaluation process. And one of the themes I'm picking up from leaders is the ideas that they picked up from one another during their presentation of learning on June 16th. Because I heard from this principal, so we're going to try that next year. I heard, and I was like, oh, this is an interesting theme. So it really was not only, the accountability side of did you meet the goals in your school improvement plan, but also became a leadership development opportunity for them to share ideas with one another. In 6.3, just some updates and information items from me. So first, response to public comments on June 13th. So we heard from two members of the public. Mr. Broadwell made comments regarding transgender students and transgender confusion, is the way he called it. So we've already responded to Mr. Broadwell on this matter at a school board meeting, and then also in an email from the board president. So Noah responded as well. So we have no additional information to share regarding that public comment. And then we also heard from Mr. Peets or Pites, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, regarding a special event he would like to plan on the grounds of FLW. That was for 2023. So I asked Shelley in Recreation and Community Service to work with him and then to bring forward if there are any special requests related to the event that would require board approval. So, if it goes beyond what is already in policy about renting facilities, then we would need some either waivers or special approval from the board. So we're going to work through the process and see if we need to bring that back.
I actually have an update on that. Sorry to
Okay.
interrupt.
Yeah.
Mr. Beats actually emailed me directly and said that due to some basically noise restrictions, that he wouldn't be able to hold it at any of the schools. So he's actually withdrawing that request because of that. So
Okay.
that's a city thing.
Oh, so that makes it a lot simpler.
Yes.
Okay.
Safe Fair Park was the only place that was large enough to be able to host it.
Got it. Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Then I also wanted to do some updates on the leadership changes. So we sent out a number of communication right at the end of the school year, and we've been working on some of these changes for quite a while, but also it was also kind of in kind of limbo a little bit based on kind of where the board wanted to go with school consolidation plans. And so it's important to, I think, for me to explain more publicly that the decisions of leadership changes are based on two priorities that we use every year as we consider leadership changes. And then one that's new because of school consolidations. So the priorities that we use in a typical year are always trying to work to align experience and talent with need. So who do we have with the right experience and talent, and what's the need in terms of a school leadership team or a principal? I'm trying to align those things. We also always really work to provide opportunities for leaders to take on new challenges and to grow. So we look for somebody that is an aspiring leader. We have an aspiring leaders program with Melissa Matarazzo from Studer, and then create kind of pathways for future leaders or leaders that would like to move into the next level to try on new roles. And then this year, going into next, we're also planning for the reduction of leadership positions. With school consolidation, we need fewer principals, fewer coaches. And now is the time to be strategic about that. And so if we have openings, we shouldn't be hiring new principals. We should be trying to figure out how to address the other priorities so that we have the flexibility to reduce in the coming year, because that's where some of the savings come from for school consolidations. So kind of how this kind of then moved through, and I'm not going to go into every single leadership position, but I think the main ones deserve a little bit more commentary. So Connie Bergman, right, moved into an open district position as the manager of school services, and Connie's going to be a great fit for that. That really requires a master scheduler kind of mindset, and that's what Aaron Norris had prior and Jeff Borland before that. And so Connie was also a master scheduler, so she's a great fit for that. And that opened the position at West Milwaukee Intermediate School. And rather than going out and posting and hiring, right, because of school consolidations, how do we align then talent with need? And Jeff Thompson becomes, at least for me, and I think based on our internal conversations, the obvious choice for West. And so for those of you that don't know Jeff's history with us, he's probably he is among our most experienced and, quite frankly, our most successful principal with the proven track record of taking low performing schools and getting them back on track and getting student achievement moving again, right? He did that at Horace Mann. And it was one of our, really kind of a bright spot for us. A high poverty school that's high achieving is really hard to do. He also put FLW on a great path and built a leadership team that he can hand it off to, and FLW's in really good shape. And even though, this has an impact on Mitchell, Jeff has only been there 1 year, and again, it's well received, well respected. And it's not a move I'd like to make after 1 year. But if we think about this through an equity lens, and one of the main goal for under finance and stability is that we align resources equitably. So the kids that need the best leadership should get the best leadership if we have it available, and that's Jeff. Right? And that makes sense from a number of aspects. And Jeff, quite frankly, is really excited about this. That is the work Jeff loves to do as a principal, is how do you take low performing schools and get them to move so that kids are actually getting what they need. But that opens up Mitchell. And we believe the right move there is for Carrie Stolenworth. Carrie's done really good work at Longfellow, and we want to honor that work and also give Carrie kind of some runway in front of her. She's a principal that will be with us, we hope, and are committed to her, and she's committed to us. And so go to Mitchell, where we can have some stability of leadership, and she has some stability in the position, because staying at Longfellow, right, it's a 1 year position at this point. And then in terms of providing leaders with opportunities to grow, right, that's second priority. So that's really where we're recommending Deidre Raymer as assistant superintendent, and that's on the employment summary today. So it helps move Deidre closer to the work of the superintendency, and we'll start to realign some of responsibilities. Laura Sproul is going to be the interim principal at Hoover, and Laura filled in when the principal was out this year and did a remarkable job. Laura has the aspirations of being an elementary principal, so it gives her a year to really try it on, but it also, because it's interim, gives us the flexibility to back out of that a year from now, because we're going to have the need for fewer principals. And also Becca Schwal will be interim principal at Longfellow. So Becca has been a really good partner with Carrie there. So it gives her an opportunity. Carrie Skanecki is a part-time assistant principal at Hale. So it expands Carrie's experience set with us. So she has intermediate and high school assistant principal experience. So she can grow, and then there's more opportunities with her. And then also in opportunities to grow, Devin Smith as the coordinator of charter schools. So she's been over the Deeper Learning Virtual Academy. She'll also now be the administrative lead for Shared Journeys. And then finally, in terms of planning into school consolidations, I've already really mentioned all of this. But that's why the principal positions at Longfellow and Hoover are interim. And we also reduced the DLC position at Lane. Knowing that that's a position that will go away next year, we think we can provide the instructional supports at Lane differently. And so we're starting to plan into what are the coming reductions. And then that leaves us still with an open assistant principal position at Central, which is posted. We're hiring for it, an open dean of students position at Hale that will also be posted, and we're hiring for that, right? So some positions we do need to fill. And then, like I shared here in a bit more detail, I'll work on some similar communication that provides more depth that will go out then in an update as the final leadership changes and the hiring kind of gets completed for these open positions, and then share it back again with all staff and all parents. So just that was a lot around the leadership changes, but I think it deserved a little bit more background information. And then the last little piece, other updates, we just want to wish everyone a safe and enjoyable 4th of July weekend. I came back from a family event yesterday, and I have never seen the Milwaukee airport that busy. So clearly, as we're coming in, a lot of people were going out of town. So I think people are ready to be together and celebrate. We sure were. So everybody have a safe and enjoyable 4th. And that completes the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you very much. Now move on to item 7, our public comments. As always, you have 3 minutes to address the board. If there's anyone on Zoom who would like to address the board, there should be a link for the sign up in the chat. You have 3 minutes to address the board. Please start by stating your name and your address. The board will not answer any questions, but if there's anything that the board can clarify immediately that is short and to the point, we will do so. Other than that, there will be no discussion. With that, we'll go with first on the list, Mr. Mikolajczyk.
Joe Mikolajczyk, 3355 South Russell Court, New Berlin. I'm here today to point out just a few examples of terrible financial irresponsibility by this board and the administration. First, the referendum costs that were spent to attempt to convince the public to approve a huge waste-laden referendum. $17,000 paid to the firm School Perceptions. The core business of this firm is to contract with school districts to convince the public to approve school referendums. $79,000 to Bray Architects for facility conditions, reports, and meetings with the public to push the referendum. $65,000 to C.G. Schmidt, planning for the referendums, which, by the way, has a much too cozy contractual relationship with the school district. School district spends millions of dollars in no bid work with C.G. Schmidt. That does not smell right to me. $24,000 Burton Meyer to produce and mail the district residents information that pushed the referendum. That's $185,000 plus additional staff time. That was well over $200,000, and the public gave you a resounding no, 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 and no. Now you want to try it again and waste more of the public's money. Second, another case of terrible fiscal mismanagement. The district administration held 2 15-minute meetings with the teachers union and teachers assistants. The results of these negotiations was the school district said, we'll give you the maximum amount we can under current state law. Surprise, surprise. The union said, that sounds like a good idea to us. This school board thought that was such a good idea, you should increase all district employees' pay. The maximum's 4.7% allowed under the law. Plus, on top of that, the additional incentive payments to teachers. This will cost taxpayers an additional $2.5 million every year. And you call that fiscal responsibility? Your so-called fiscal management is a joke and harms the public. The city of Racine, population 76,000, is going to propose a citywide referendum to spend $2.5 million to increase police services. Racine proposes a citywide referendum to spend $2.5 million. You have two 15-minute meetings and with the unions, and then this fiscally irresponsible board votes, makes a quick vote to spend $2.5 million. You need to rethink how you're doing things because it's disgusting and shows no respect for the public and their money. Any questions for me? As usual, I didn't think so.
All right. There's no one else signed up on the public comments sheet right now, but I'll wait for a few seconds in case there's anyone who joined the Zoom meeting late and would like to sign up for public comments and give those an opportunity to do so. And seeing none, we'll close public comments at this time. Move on to item 8, our board reports, starting with review of the board calendar, item 8.1. So today is June 27th, and we have a regular Board of Education meeting where we will take action on our proposed 22-23 budget and preliminary tax levy number 2. And immediately following, we have a closed session meeting. On July 11th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a closed session meeting. On July 18th at 6 p.m., we have a closed session meeting that will be Zoom only. And then on July 25th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting and immediately followed by a workshop with consultant Melissa Matarazzo. Let's move on to item 8.2, our board committee reports. So we only have one this evening, 8.2.1, financial stability and efficiency. Ms. Kaiser?
Oh, Oscar, can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right, yeah, Ms. Carr's got to take over for me tonight as I am out of state and she did a nice job taking notes. Next month will be my report. Thank you so much, Ms. Carr.
And community provision eligibility. During the 21-22 school year, all students were able to receive free breakfast and lunch as part of a federal program. However, our district still qualifies for the program, but it would come with an additional expense. We would be using Fund 50 revenue, and Erin will explain why this is a good use of those funds. We then discussed School Board Policy 6235. During our audit, we were notified that this policy did not suffice. Erin will explain the proposed changes and we will take action on this tonight. And lastly, we are currently in an RFP process for the Wellness Center and the bids have been narrowed down from 6 to 3. Erin's team will be interviewing them on July 13th and then come to the board with a recommendation during a workshop in the near future.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Carr of the committee about her report? Or any objects or items that you would like to have considered at their next meeting? Seeing none, we will move on to item 8.3, board member reports of community events. With school out, I know there's a lot, but I want to open up. Anyone have any community events that they would like to report on or give a shout out to? No? All right. No problem. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity. That's all. So move on to item 9, our consent agenda. We have 4 items this evening. Item 9.1, the approval of minutes from our June 13th meeting, regular June 13 meeting. Item 9.2, the employment summary. Item 9.3, the supplementary contracts, and item 9.4, the financial summary. Does anyone need anything separated? Mr. Sikich?
9.3, please.
9.3. All right. Anything else need separated? All right. Seeing none, I'd look for a motion 9.2, and 9.4.
Motion to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. All right, and now 9.3,
Motion to approve.
Second.
moved and seconded. Any discussion?
It's just that I need to recuse myself from this.
Okay, sounds good. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And one recusal.
Okay, so if I could just take a moment to congratulate Deidre. This is in a quiet room. And, you've done the work that needs to be done here and led it so well that I think this is a recognition of that work and puts you in a space to start taking on some additional responsibility. And I'm looking forward to working with you in that role. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, so then we'll move on to our action items for this evening, starting at 10.1, our 22-23 Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. Ms. Rammer.
So this is an annual item for us that we approve the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook each year. It had a couple of adjustments this year from last year that were in a board report not that long ago. One of them is to add some clearer definition on selection of library materials, as that's come up a number of times on public comments. And so we want our families to have some guidance around that when it comes to how we select those library materials and the commitment we're making. Right now, we use a platform called Common Sense Media, which has a rating system for books, much like when you go to the movies, it says PG, PG-13, whatnot. So they have a rating system. And so the books that are rated 15 plus will only be located in our libraries. And a few of the ones that have come into question were rated 15 plus and in our intermediate schools. We went back and reviewed quite a few of our library books, and we don't have any that are rated 15 plus in any of our elementary libraries as well. And we're also working on making sure that our inventory is cleaned up so that when families use the online resources to see which books we have in which library, that's accurate. So that was the change to the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, was really just putting a little bit more definition for families so that they understand. We trust them as a family to make the choices that are right for them at any time. They are welcome to review the books that their children have checked out from our school libraries, but that our commitment to that is to keep the books rated 15 and plus at the high school libraries only. So that was a change new to the handbook this year. And then the other change was just to add the language from our board policy about body searches to the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. We have not had an issue with that historically, but we did have a few parents question emptying a student's pockets at school or things like that. And there's been some in the news recently about that happening in other districts. So we thought it was really important that that goes into our Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, as parents sign off on that every year at the online enrollment period, so that they know what's in there and what's allowable under policy and under statute. And then the last thing was to remove the section around not being able to wear hats and hoods at school. We had a meeting with principals to address that, to ask the question about, is there a reason we shouldn't remove that? Many of them already are allowing hats and hoods to a certain extent. The one big question that comes up on it, and Amy and I were talking about this just before the meeting as well, is the safety issue. Like, can you identify kids on the cameras and things like that? The principals felt really confident that they still can. There's been increased clarity in some of our camera footage to be able to see some of those things. And many of the principals said it's extremely rare that they can't identify somebody when it comes to the video footage. So they felt really important that certainly that was acceptable kind of in public use now for students. It's a safety measure for some of our students. They feel more safe within their own selves to be able to have head coverings or things around them. It's culturally more responsive to be allowing some of those items. And so we felt it was really important to remove that from the handbook. Students will not be allowed to wear the kind that zip over your face, that cover your whole face, so that we don't have any issues with identifying students if there's any questions. And at any time, if it's inappropriate or really distracting to the learning environment, just like the rest of the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, the principals will handle that as a disciplinary measure.
Questions?
Was there discussion, I mean, aside from just the principals, like with teachers? Because I know I've a lot of friends that teach in the district, and I know I've heard a lot of concern from teacher friends that aren't very comfortable with this. So I'm just wondering, was there a lot of conversation with the teachers also as far as how they felt about this in their classrooms with the students still being allowed to wear the hoods and the hats and stuff?
Yeah, we did not do a survey of teachers. We just met with the principals to discuss it. And then
Okay.
again, it came from the request of principals to us to have that removed. So but we did not do a survey of teachers.
Because I guess that's my big concern, you know, especially with everything that's going on in schools right now and all the safety things. I guess that's where my hesitation is. And I guess too, I guess in a lot of situations, I look at the attitudes of some kids and how it almost kind of comes off as disrespectful. That I guess that's where my concern is it's just another way for them to close off and hide. And so I guess that's what worries me, you know, and I think that's great that the principals aren't as concerned, but like I say, in just talking to some of my teacher friends in the district that have concerns about it, that were really apprehensive when they had heard the buzz about this being removed, they were concerned about it. And so I guess on their behalf, I'm kind of voicing that, but and myself,
Yep.
you know, just as a parent and just everything going on in the world
Mhm.
right now, I don't know. I don't know if anybody else feels that way or not, but I guess that's just something that I think about right away.
Yeah,
So I
So,
was just wondering what
couple
how
thoughts.
teachers felt.
Oops, sorry, Brenda. With this recommendation, I mean, we can always step back from it, right? So we can learn and change things, right? So these are not things that are set in stone. But also, we make individual plans around kids that don't follow rules, that are disrespectful, and kids then have to follow an individual plan. And we would take a similar approach if there's a young person for whom, you know, wearing a hoodie becomes a distraction or a way to avoid, we would build an individual plan and start there around a different expectation for that young person.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, and the expectations around dress codes, around behaviors in schools evolve over time,
Mhm.
right? There were times when school boards would talk about chewing gum.
Oh, I remember
Right.
those days.
So we're well beyond that. So these things do evolve with
Mhm.
time. And so, and with each step, there's always some apprehension. We take a step, learn, and if we need to step back, we do. And if there are individual kids for whom it's a problem, we make a plan.
I will reiterate that I do have the same concerns that
Mhm.
Rebecca has, just because we are seeing, I mean, we're putting hard lines in our schools, you know, and so when I think about that, I want to make sure that, you know, I think, yeah, I would be concerned about safety. That was when actually a parent came to me and asked me about this, and I kind of was like, oh, then I kind of thought about it. So I do share the concerns. I mean, I have trust in our principals. I'm hoping that I think our teachers, you know, if they'd be able to, you know, if they feel uncomfortable, that they're able to go to them and stuff. But I
Mhm.
do see where there might be some apprehension with our teachers and even some of our parents in regards to this.
Yeah, and that's
Mhm.
certainly feedback that I can give back to the principals as well, to make sure that they have staff meetings at the start of the school year to talk about what that process is going to be if it becomes a distraction to the learning environment.
Mhm.
And then that gets addressed at a different place in the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook.
Mhm.
Many of them shared they are not currently enforcing that
Okay.
because it has become, you know, again, the students who are asking to have their hood up partially and not have their face covered or wear hats or things like that at school are doing it for their own personal reasons, whether they're mental health reasons, whether they're culturally appropriate for what their beliefs, all of those pieces. And so that was where I think the request came from. It's been out there for a couple of years to request it, to make that adjustment in the Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. But certainly, just like Marty said, take any steps that we need to. And if we need to take a step back on that because it becomes a problem, certainly we can.
Necessarily have a problem with it. I think, you know, as Dr. Lexman stated, things change and they evolve, and I think it makes sense. And I would assume that, you know, we would react appropriately if we needed to make adjustments. I guess I'm more concerned about the fact that a change like that was proposed without feedback from the teachers. Like, to me, anytime you're going to make something that is going to impact the teachers and how they manage their classrooms, that should be done based on feedback. So to push for that without having that, if that's what occurred, that's a little concerning.
Yeah, and much like Amy said, right, Brian, when the request came to me from the principals, it
Yeah.
is my understanding that they would have then discussed it directly
Okay.
with the teachers. And if they haven't, then they have the opportunity to do so, should we decide to approve it as is this evening and make sure that that teachers are clear in what the expectations
Mhm.
are, that why that would have been removed. And that there's an attempt to trust the students a bit more in some of those pieces. And if they demonstrate that we can't trust them with those things, much like everything else, we rein that back in and we make different appropriate accommodations around that.
For me personally, I think the good of this will probably outweigh the bad. And I think that, as we do with all of our schools, we allow them to kind of run the school hall that community is used to being run. And as Ms. Raymer already mentioned, some principals weren't enforcing this for one reason or another. So I think that the good could outweigh any possible harm that might come from it, with the understanding that there will be a way for feedback to come from classrooms and parents if there is a concern that they don't feel is being addressed by having this policy not being in there. And then, either individually, those students will be addressed, or maybe at a school level, things will be addressed by the principal. But I think the flexibility for that is there by taking it out. By not having the rule, they can do what they want. And then if they need to add something back in from a principal perspective, then they can do that. So that's just where I'm at on it. So Brendan, I'm sorry. I saw you were just ready to talk when I started saying something. So.
You're fine. Yeah, I'm this doesn't seem like a big deal to me. Being a former classroom teacher, kids want to wear hats. I don't care. And I think it's a distraction in the hallways for people to be sitting there and being the clothing police of like, hey, let's pull that off, let's do this. And then it takes away from being able to actually have interactions with the kids that are genuine and honest and open, because instead of treating them like they're in prison, you're treating them as people and just interacting with them. So I think that this is a good change. What I would question is, are there allowances for teachers to say these need to come off? And I say that only from the perspective of being a former chemistry teacher, where we have open flames. You don't necessarily want your hat out and over, or hood and dangling things coming out, because those are fire hazards. So is there local control for certain times where it's like, all right, these need to come off, or testing, because then you want the notes on the brim, because that's what happens. So
Yes, and there are any of the science classes, the woods classes, like there's certain places you're using equipment where that just wouldn't be appropriate, much like when we go out in public, there's places where that just wouldn't be appropriate. So the safety contracts and things like that come with those classes will be specific to address some of those concerns. Brennan, yes. And then testing, things like that. There are certain rules, like right now, our rule is that kids should be responding with the technology to not having it out in class should the teacher have that requested. Well, during testing, they have to keep it all locked up in a locker and things like that, so that we don't get it. There's no accusation of any impropriety. So yes.
I like this change, and I think that it allows the interactions to be more genuine. If kids are going to not secondary, but their post-educational components, they can wear hoodies, hats, do whatever they want. So like training them and giving them that responsibility on how to do it appropriately, I think is good. So I like this.
Kristen, did you have any comments on this? I want to make sure you have an opportunity.
No, just kind of like the follow up on what others have said. It gets real tiring being the closed police. I know this as a teacher myself, and sometimes kids who are not being taken well care of at home might want to wear a hood that day. It's more responsive to a lot of our kids.
Any other questions or comments?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Last minute discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. Let's move on to item 10.2, our 21-22 budget. Mr. Norris.
Good evening, everyone. So the first item I have here tonight is I guess in response to the June 13th workshop we had on our 21-22 budget amendments. Budget amendments, as we talked about, are often a routine part of the budget cycle. And this year we saw three main changes in our expenditures. The first one is in staffing. So the first thing, staffing is a budget that is planned for, but often things change throughout the year. And so one of the main things that happens is we budget for all new hires to have full benefit packages, and that often doesn't happen. So when a staff member elects for single coverage, that's actually a savings to the budget. And so we saw around $600,000 in savings from staffing. Additionally, with delays in hiring, sometimes trying to find people, late in the year, sometimes that occurs, and then those salaries and benefits are prorated as well. So those are two of the main reasons there. We also saw additional savings moving our retirees that are 65 and older to Anthem. And so we had budgeted for a planned savings of $600,000, and is fortunate to us that we additionally saw $400,000 in added savings there. And then lastly, in our expenses, we elected to move the math curriculum adoption to the 22-23 year, and then shifting those expenses to ESSER was in $1 million in savings. Lastly, we saw added revenue per Governor Evers' COVID relief funds. We saw an additional $1 million in revenue. So the sum total of the 21-22 budget amendment is for $3 million. We also discussed at the June 13th workshop, shifting those funds to be committed from a future board action item, which will happen tonight, for future retiree benefits. And that is the recommendation.
Questions? Should be familiar, went through this in the workshop. There's no changes from that workshop there?
No.
Okay. Kristen, any questions? I can't see her, so. She's shaking her head, I can't see it. She's not jumping up, so I'm presuming that she has no questions. So.
I'm good, thank you.
Second, any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Kristen was also an aye. See her mouth. All right, let's move on to item 10.3, 21-22 committed fund balance for retiree benefits. Mr. Norris, you alluded to this earlier.
So just moving sequentially through that. So in response to the 21-22 amendments, we would look for an action approval to formally commit the funds to committed fund balance for the purpose of future retiree benefits. So at this time, the budget amendments sum total $3 million. By committing the funds to committed fund balance for future retiree benefits, we would have a total of $7 million in committed fund balance, including the three, should the board approve that today, for future retiree benefits. As a note, the board can take action at any time to uncommit these funds, should you decide. But I think long-term planning for future retiree benefits, given some of the discussion we've had throughout the past year or two around the expense for retirees currently, and shifting from a defined contribution to a kind of a HRA pay-as-you-go expense, is really in the best interest long-term of the district. So,
Questions? Aaron, could you just speak briefly about why it's important that the board take action to commit the funds, how that's different than just leaving it in the fund 10 balance?
sure, yeah. So when the board formally approves committed fund balance, it would take formal board action to uncommit the funds, meaning that by committing the funds this evening to future retiree benefits, those funds can only be used for future retiree benefits unless the board would uncommit the funds. That's different than assigning the fund balance, because it could be unassigned at any time without official board approval. Yeah, so it's really, it's committing the funds for a specific purpose, similar to committing funds that we do for like Fund 46 for future capital improvements and things like that.
Another piece of it is committed auditors, like it, especially when you're starting to have a large fund balance, which we do now. And if, and it may come again, depending on, the politics around education, where we've heard in the past, well, just use your fund balance. Well, if the board has said, no, we're saving this for very specific reasons, in the politics of education, that also is helpful. That the board is being thoughtful about future needs and building a fund balance to address those needs. So it's not as easy for legislators to look at it and go, well, just use that money. No, the board said that's for a specific purpose. Yeah.
And having a plan to use it. And we've been discussing kind of why this is an issue, a fiscal challenge for us, and moving forward, we've been discussing it, and my hope, and I think the discussion I had with the fiscal committee on Thursday last week was to at some point this year, begin having workshops around what this could look like. We're currently in the stages of an OPEB, which is other employment benefits or retirement actuarial study to figure out our long-term liabilities, both short-term and long-term, and then looking at what are the liabilities of an HRA, short-term and long-term, and essentially trying to weigh out our short-term expenses with our long-term liabilities. So we do have a plan and we are working towards it. So I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I was actually going to ask about that because I've been kind of beating that drum for a few years. So I'm glad that I know there's all other priorities that were taking place. I'm glad that we're finally getting to that point that we can look at it, because it's the last kind of big axe, if you will, hanging over our necks that I think would be good to address, figure out, get in place, and have a thoughtful plan. And putting this money aside, I think it really puts us in a good position to be able to actually implement it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments about this?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. All right, let's see. 10.4, 22-23 preliminary budget and tax levy. Mr. Norris.
Up again.
There you go. You need any water? You want
Not
to-
yet. At some point, though, I
Okay.
might. Yeah. This is also an extension of the June 13th workshop, but annually, the administration prepares a prelim budget outlook for the board, and that kind of happens in 3 phases. So the first phase happens in April, and that is when we review our estimated or projected revenue for the district. And that happens in April. The second is what occurred on the 13th in terms of a workshop. So the workshop on the 13th really is building off of the April meeting, which is estimated revenue, but the workshop looks more at estimated revenue, projected expenses, and the goal, which I'm happy to report again, is that on the 13th, we've reported a balanced budget, which, as I think Noah mentioned at that meeting, hasn't happened in a few years, which is really great. And it shows the extension of Caitlin and the board's work around being fiscally committed to the long term. Once we have the prelim budget approved, then we looking at our estimated and projected revenue to get the tax levy. And so the tax levy comes from 2 things. It's the estimated revenue and our anticipated state aid. And page here, a number of factors impact our district's mill rate, but it's essentially a formula dictated by the state statute, which takes a revenue limit and it takes the revenue limit and it subtracts the state aid, and the total revenue limit less state aids equates to the school-based portion of the property tax levy, and the proportion of the property tax levy has decreased similar to our mill rate. And so, as I mentioned, there's many factors that contribute to a declining tax levy mill rate, but it should be noted that the projected mill rate for the 22-23 school year is a full $2 less than where our mill rate sat on average for the last decade. Our budget does include key assumptions, and I know we mentioned this at the June 13th meeting, but just to review them again, the main ones are an 8% increase in health insurance. This is a projection. We are currently out to RFP, as Jane reported earlier this evening, so that is something that could change. We don't expect that would be higher. If anything, I would expect it would be lower than that. That's why this is a projection. It includes a 4.7% increase for staff. A $0 increase from the state, as this is the second year of the biennial budget, 5% increase in dental, and then ESSER funding to pay down debt to balance the budget completely at $875,000 of ESSER funds. So with that, as we know, this is a prelim budget, things can change, but really happy to report a balanced budget this time.
Questions?
I liked seeing the percent reduction of that mill rate just to get an understanding of which way it's moving. And I took a glance at the sheet today too. Is it possible to see line by line, whether it's up, whether it's down and how much? Not tonight, of course, but just eventually before we go to the official budget.
But do you mean of the attachment, the prelim budget?
Yeah, the Excel document that was sent.
Yeah, I could craft that out, absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or comments? I did one thing I want to clarify. So I did say that we don't usually have a balanced budget now.
Yeah.
In June.
Absolutely.
We've only passed balanced budgets since I've been on the board in a few years before that. So by the time we get to October, we balance it. But usually at this point, we're like $1.5 to $2 million over, and then we got to see what falls and where health insurance comes. That's usually the big one. But by the time we get to October, that final budget has always been balanced. I just want to make sure that's clear for the public who might be watching. We passed balanced budgets. So anything else? Otherwise, I look for a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much. Let's move on to 10.5, 22-23 district-wide community eligibility provision. Mr. Norris.
So the 22-23 community eligibility provision essentially is an extension from the 21-22 current year, in which the federal government has a policy, a program, sorry, that allows all students currently to eat breakfast for free. Breakfast and lunch for free. And the program currently is called Seamless Summer. And that's a federal government program, which will be ending as of June 30th of this month. And so part of, reviewing fiscal stability in Fund 50, we can only use Fund 50 funds for certain reasons. And so one of the reasons that you can use it for is to allow your entire district to become what's called CEP eligible. And if we have enough schools that qualify, meaning that the number of students at those schools exceeds the percentage that allows the school to become CEP eligible. And if more than half the schools in our district are CEP eligible, we can move to district-wide CEP, which allows all students next year, regardless of free and reduced status, to eat for free breakfast and lunch. It does come at an added expense, but per DPI, if you exceed 3 months operating expenses, meaning that you have more money in Fund 10 that it would cost you to operate 3 months, it's called excessive fund balance in Fund 50. And so we are directed to spend those funds, right? And so the added expense for moving to a district-wide CEP, assuming no reimbursement rate increase, which has never happened, would be about $400,000. And as of the end of this year, we had $813,000 in excessive balance, meaning that the money that we have to spend to do this would be less than half of what was considered excessive. So to me, this was a great usage that really directly impacts our families, especially given some of the, what they've had this year and some of the, inflationary times in the world today. I thought it was a great idea.
Questions? Amy.
I think this is great. The only question I guess I have is, what are we doing to make sure or to encourage families to fill out the applications? I mean, I know the incentive for the fee or the free or reduced fees is an incentive for some families, but like I just want to know, because I want to make sure that we're getting that done, that end of things done too.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually met with our online registration team. So back when the pandemic hit, we used to have forms and fees nights, right? And so we had to move to having that online. So we, like many districts, moved to an online registration platform. Part of that platform is families annually have to go in and register their kids for school, different than enrollment, register for school. So when we moved to all CEP district-wide, the free and reduced application itself, I believe, is 6 pages long. So just the length in itself is a natural deterrent. So when we move to all CEP, we can actually move to a sharing form. I'm sorry, an alternative application form, which includes the sharing form. So for families to qualify free and reduced in terms of breakfast and lunch and to have their fees waived, they currently have to fill out a 6-page free and reduced application and then fill out a sharing form. The free and reduced application allows them to potentially qualify for free and or reduced breakfast and lunch. The sharing form also aligns then separate forms for them to get waived school fees and athletic fees. By moving to an all district CEP, that can be included in one form. It's one page. And it's a part of online registration. And so we can make a lot of processes in there mandatory that they at least look at it. Families don't certainly have to fill it out. It's their choice. But we've historically, by launching online registration, had a very high success rate in families completing it. And so, but it is an added emphasis. So I'm glad you brought that up. So families filling that out has other impacts in funding and title and other things like that. So
Yeah.
we really want families to fill it out. And so it is an item of discussion because when things like this are free, it is a natural deterrent to not have to complete it. So, yeah.
Other questions? I did see an announcement that Congress might actually be extending this,
Yes.
but I think we should pass it either way. Either we do it on our own or we do it with more federal dollars to help cover it. But I think there's no reason a kid should be hungry regardless if they're rich or poor or whatever their backgrounds might be. I think that they're not going to learn if they're hungry. So I think that's a good move to make. And we'll be continuing indefinitely.
To that end, do we have anything, there's got to be a study out there that would point to that, just as evidence, again, of a fiscal responsibility, something that points out that, what is the impact of this program on academic achievement? I wonder if that might be useful, just as an add-on at some point if such a study exists.
Yeah, I mean, this program itself obviously has only been around since COVID, but there's lots of studies showing that if there's other, impediments to a child,
Yeah, I mean,
they're
20 years ago,
in their
the
home, they're not
school
gonna learn,
was-
they're just not gonna be in the right mind frame to be able to learn. Food is one of the biggest ones. If you're hungry, you're like, well, I don't care about math today, I figure out what I'm gonna eat next. So I think that this really at least helps. It's not gonna push, every child all the way there, but I think it definitely helps not having to worry about, well, what am I gonna eat today? So I think that's a good thing. Any other questions or comments? I look for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded by all. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. All right, any water now? Any breaks? Yeah, you good?
I'm okay. We'll
Any
keep going.
oxygen? You're- Okay. All right, so now we're at 10.6, 22-23 school fees. Mr.
So this is an annual item, school fees, and it really aligns similar to what Amy's question was in regards to the Freer's application. This is a part of online registration. And so, we've proposed a prelim balanced budget. And for many of the reasons I just mentioned with moving to CEP for all families, we would also recommend to the board that we do not increase school fees for the 22-23 school year for families.
Questions? I look for a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. 10.7, update to policy number 6235, fund balance as a first reading. Mr. Norris.
So this is a bit of this is not an annual item. This is a direct result of our 2021 audit. So just for some background, the auditors that many organizations have provide either recommendations or findings. So what happens typically in an audit when we get a recommendation from last year to this year is they look at your recommendations and then they go, where they fixed? They aren't fixed, then it becomes a finding. So some auditors are nicer than others. I think as auditors get to working with organizations, you find more recommendations and less findings, and then they trust in you to make the recommendations policy and move forward. So this is a recommendation from our auditors. So when our auditors reviewed this policy in terms of at the budget amendments, when we don't commit funds, we assign them, and similar to kind of our previous discussion, the auditor's feedback was during the 2021 audit, our auditors recommended that we update our policy to reflect more explicit terminology, which allows the Director of Business Services ability to assign fund balance. With our current policy, it allows the board to designate an official the ability to do this, but does not explicitly designate anyone. And so our auditors recommended updating our policies to reflect the reflect the past language as that is our current practice. So on the action item, it rather than read all of it, essentially our past language in this policy reflects our current practice, that when we have a budget amendment, we bring that to the FSE committee, then it goes to a workshop, and then the board is able to hear kind of the recommendations around either we're committing fund balance, assigning fund balance, things like that. And it's a direct result of the audit. So that's kind of the background.
Questions? This is a first reading. There's going to be a second reading before it's officially in there. So anything comes up later on, you're trying to get to sleep and you're like, oh, I have a question. Write it down and we'll do it for the second. So we still take action on passing that first reading. So I need a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. And let's see here, 10.8, I can't quite make it out. Oh, yes, 22-23 district property liability and workers' compensation insurance. Mr. Norris.
This is the last one, I promise. This is an annual item, and it is to review our proposal for property liability workers' compensation. So we work with Marsh McLennan Agency. It's our insurance consultants. And so I'm happy to report that our total proposal this year, we saw a 9% decrease in our overall property liability and workers' compensation. The main reason for that is essentially about 60% of the cost here is around workman's compensation. So workman's compensation, they do an average of the 3 years of what's called an MOD rating. Essentially, it's calculating the loss ratio as compared to other state averages. And so we saw an increase from 1920 to 2021, from 2021 to 2022. And so for 21-22 to 22-23, hard to say that a couple times, we saw a decrease finally. So our average, the 3-year average, including 22-23 decreased, which is what accounts for the 9% decrease, which is really great. And it goes back to exactly the reason why the prelim budget is prelim, because now there'll be additional dollars that we'll have in the budget that we would not have had with a balanced budget. So that kind of up and down happens all the way into October. But this is really great news, and working with MMA, a lot of what they work with us on is decreasing workman's compensation, getting people back to work in different capacities quickly, whenever they're able to. But things like this it's really good to report. So.
Questions? No questions? I'll look for a motion.
Approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Then we have 10.9, 22-23 BLDA open enrollment seats. It says Miss Raymer, but I'm wondering if she wants to. Aaron's in the group.
He's on a roll. We did talk about that today, if he wants to just keep barreling ahead, and we actually do work on this one really closely together. Just for some background, Deeper Learning Virtual Academy has now been open for a year, and really successfully. Devin and Adam together have done some really nice work to keep things moving along and engage our families. We've drawn back a couple of families who opened and rolled out to other virtual academies, which was exciting. And we've got a lot of interest this year in open enrolling into our virtual academy. The seats didn't come forward prior to now, as the rest of the additional seats came forward, because there's a process that the charter uses to consider applications from resident families. And that process just wasn't yet complete when we came forward with the other additional seats at the last meeting. So these are the additional seats that we are proposing to be available for specifically straight enrollment into Deeper Learning Virtual Academy that we have room for within the current staffing. We use a similar staffing allocation as we do for our other schools, although the virtual academy can take broader numbers of class size per student because they're not synchronous for the full day. So the kindergarten teacher has chunks of time with each grade level, not that full day continuously. So it allows for a few extra seats inside of that within our staffing allocation. And then it also has, we went through and did caseload calculations as we had some students with special needs who were interested in applying to Deeper Learning Virtual Academy. And so these would be the numbers that we would like to add open enrollment seats directly to our virtual academy.
Questions? No questions. I look for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. All right, so that ends our action items for this evening. Aaron, please go get a lozenge and
It's his first
Gargle with
official
some salt
meeting as
water.
the
Yeah.
director. I think he was trying to
Yeah.
put all of your things on the first meeting here.
so.
Yeah, I was wondering, took off for 2 weeks and left me with the stack of annual items, so.
So we are going to go in executive session. We do need to adjourn this meeting though. So I need a motion for adjourning.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. We'll reconvene in executive session in 5 minutes.